Sex is the life force energy that runs through us all. Can you use sexual energy for your spiritual evolution? Or perhaps for emotional healing? Is it even possible? Clinical sexologist Dr. Martha Tara Lee will explore all these and more on Eros Evolution on Om Times Radio.
Hello, and welcome to Eros Evolution. This is where sexuality and spirituality meets. My name is Martha. I'm a clinical sexologist with a doctorate in human sexuality, and I'm from Eros Coaching. That's eroscoaching.com. So I've been doing this show for the last 2 years now. Well, 2 years and counting, more like 2.5 and counting. And every so often, I would go through every single episode that I've done over the last few months and do a little bit of a summary. And today's episode is more of a cheat sheet of what has happened in the last 16 episodes of Eros Evolution. So I'm doing this because some people may want to first understand a little bit more about the episode before actually listening to it, because each episode is 1 hour and it's an investment of your time. And so some of you might prefer to get a summary snapshot of the key takeaways so that you can do other things with your time. And so I'm doing this cheat sheet of sorts so that you can benefit from it. And my reason for doing this is also for me to take some time to do a little bit of a recap for myself and a reflection so that I can really integrate the things that I've learned from my guests, and also to make sure that the show is always relevant to listeners out there. The show started with the purpose of always exploring the link between sex and spirit, and every episode I do make it a point to ask my guests what they see is the link between sex and spirit. However, sometimes they talk about other things that are relating to love, sex, and relationships, and so some of them is not actually specifically on answering that question of the link between sex and spirit. It's important to do a reflection because we get busy and sometimes we forget what we are doing and why we even started. And so this reflection is as much for you as it is for me. Okay, so let's move to the first episode that I want to summarize. And this is on April 27th. And depending on how you count it, but the way I count it, it is actually episode 119. And that episode was titled When Procreation and Recreation Collide, Couples and Intimacy During Infertility Treatment. And this was with my colleague, Stephanie. And she is a sex therapist like myself. Well, she's a sex therapist, and I'm more of a sex educator and sexologist. The difference is our training. Her training is more on psychology based, and so in that episode, she shared about her work with working with couples who are going through fertility treatment, as the title reveals. And in the show, she talks about what infertility means for couples. She defines infertility as people who've been trying for more than 6 months, or 6 months or more for people who are above 35, and for people below 35, it's 12 months, which is 1 year. And infertility has to do with not just the quality of the egg of the woman, but also the sperm of the man. And there is a sense of grief when it comes to a loss of health, couples questioning that they're not meant to be together, that the chemistry is not right, and then there's also the financial strain as they go through infertility treatment. The injections for fertility treatments can cause a terrible time as the female goes through a lot of hormonal changes. And so she also mentions in the show the term splash pregnancy, which is when the insemination happens outside of the vagina, where the sperm goes in by having the sperm ejaculating outside. She talks about some of the symptoms of first trimester pregnancy, or fatigue, morning sickness, shock, and from second, third trimester onwards, people who have lack of sex education, whether it's cultural, they actually stop having sex, and this can also cause a strain in the relationship. So some of her advice, I have it summarized here. Some of the advice that she has for the couples is to not go alone, not go through fertility treatments by themselves, and see if they can get the help, support of a mental health practitioner like herself. To have time for fun sex, and she calls it baby making sex. So it's not just about being task oriented all the time, not forgetting to have dinners and holding hands. Third, to not be embarrassed about talking about anything that they want to with their doctor. Sometimes the embarrassment or awkwardness around sex causes us to not talk about things, and actually makes things worse because we need support. And being embarrassed about it doesn't really help us. Trust me, your doctor probably has heard everything, and their job and their desire really in what they're doing is to help people, and so there's really no need to be embarrassed. Number 4, doing things for relaxation, which is very much linked to baby making sex. Things for relaxation that are fun, that can actually help with fertility, needs to be done, like meditation, walking in the park, and things like that. Yoga. These are some of the things that can help with relaxation, and actually helps with the hormones as well. Number 5, some people see the child as sacred, and they don't talk about the process, and this sometimes can cause depression, baby blues during pregnancy, and this is the time actually to be closer to your partner, and this act of creating a baby can be a sacred process. So in asking Stephanie about the link between sex and spirits, she says that she sees love as a divine force, which stems from our desire to connect with other person, and that we are made for sexual pleasure, and that we need to continue working on not associating shame with sex. And that is episode 20. That's April 27, when procreation and recreation collide. And you can find the link to every single episode of Eros Evolution by going to Google, and you key in Eros Evolution at a glance. You'll be able to come to this link where I have put every single episode on that one link. So what you do is just scroll up and down. Whereas if you go, access Eros Evolution through the Om Times Radio Network website, you'll find that they actually present it in many different links. So I just created it as an ease of use for listeners out there. So episode 120, which is 1 week later, Love for Long-Term Couples with Don Beck and Gerard Getz. And they've been on the show for 3 times now, and they are Tantra teachers, and they are also a long-term couple who's been together for a really long time, more than 10 years. And during the show, they talked about their own relationship and how being in a long-term relationship, for a lot of people, chemistry can fade, and couples can sink into patterns of repetition, feeling unattracted, feeling taken for granted, feeling blasé about sex, having lackluster and hopelessness feelings around making any changes. So for them, being Tantra teachers, of course, they talk about Tantra, and they also mention about porn, and they feel that other than watching porn, there are practices that couples can engage in order to be much more connected to each other. So they also mention in the show Gary Chapman, who coined the 5 love languages. So they actually explain what the 5 love languages are, and they also recommend an online quiz that one can take to understand what is their 5 love languages. usually we have a dominant love language, and so in the show they talk about each of them and how by understanding each of them you can be very intentional in incorporating this into your sex life. So for instance, in order to play like new loves, playing with the sense of taste, with the sensations on your hands, with your eyes, so that you become more stimulated and become much more open and nourished. And this is something that you can cultivate through the day. So they also talked about eye gazing as a practice. You don't have to do it for long, and giving appreciations to each other, giving different types of touch to each other can actually go deep and can help you start feeling emotional and then open in wanting to share more of yourself with your partner. So there are a lot of tips in that episode, Love for Long-Term Couples. We're going to have a break in 1 minute. And in May 11, we have a Sex Addiction is Not a Diagnosis with Dr. Roger Labby. And he's a sex therapist, a sex educator, and he's one of the pioneers, one of my seniors. And I was very, very happy to have him come on the show, because he feels strongly that sex addiction is not a mental illness, contrary to what a lot of people say. And in that episode, he really debunked that myth, and he really explained why. It's really worth listening to that show because a lot of people are still very confused about the term sex addiction. So we have a break and we'll come back and talk more about the other episodes. So stay tuned.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Om Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Om Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fox, host and astrologer of The Astrology Show. Each week, I'll give you access to the current transits, which are a valuable tool that provide astrological information to help unlock the potential each of us has. Understanding the stars can help steer us in the right direction to make better informed choices. So if you're wondering what's going to happen in your week ahead, be sure to tune in to The Astrology Show for guidance, Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Every 2 minutes, an American is sexually assaulted. The majority of victims know their attacker. It could be your friend, your neighbor, or someone you met at a party. If you said no, it's rape, and it's a crime. This is Christina Ricci with RAIN. Call the National Sexual Assault Hotline today at 1-800-656-HOPE or visit RAIN.org. That's RAINN.org.
Brought to you by RAIN and this station.
Welcome back to today's show, and we're talking about the different episodes that we've been having on Eros Evolution. That's the last 16 episodes that we've been having. This is a summary of all the different shows so that you can decide for yourself whether you would like to watch them. So far, I've summarized episode 119, 120, and 121. And just before break, I was talking about Sex Addiction is Not a Diagnosis with Roger Labby. And in that show, we talked about how sex addiction is not a mental illness, and contrary to what people think, it's not an addiction. The reason being that there is no scientific empirical proof, and so this was actually removed from the DSM guide. So this stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and this manual, which is more like a textbook, contains every single mental condition that people have, and is used as a reference for psychologists, psychiatrists all around the world in diagnosing their patients. And this book is so important because this is the basis of being able to then get insurance. So if it's not in the book, you can't really put that as that's the condition, and therefore you can't really apply for insurance, which means that a lot of people would actually not want to seek treatment for that. And so what this means is connected to affordability. And so in not doing that, it's kind of a win, because if there is money to be made in diagnosing people with sex addiction, more people will do that. And we have more people walking around feeling really bad about themselves. So what Dr. Roger Labby is saying, we had a discussion in the show, is that people who are are termed sex addicts, are people who generally have compulsive tendencies, which means that they are more likely to be dependent on substances such as smoking, drinking, drugs, and the fact that this is sex compulsive behavior is just coincidental. So to blame sex is really doing sex, disservice, really. And so in the show, he also talks about how psychiatry actually over-medicates people, and these people may have high anxiety, and the SSRIs can actually lead to side effects. And it's also believed that there are possible long-term effects on going on medication to control compulsive behaviors. So it's a very interesting episode for anybody who is curious, interested around addiction. And Dr. Labby is very passionate, and you will probably really like this episode. So in the next episode that I want to talk about is episode 122, which is sex rituals to raise sexual excitement, with Laurie Beth Betley. And she's my colleague who is actually in UK. She's a sex and intimacy coach, psychologist, speaker, educator, and author. And she actually talks about rituals, which means things that we do with a sacredness behind it. And it's different from routines, which are things that we do day to day without really thinking about it. For instance, brushing our teeth or the way we shower. So these are routines that we do without really thinking about it. Whereas rituals involves being fully in the present, in the here and now, and requires attention. So the intention behind it, creating that sacred space. So in that episode, she actually talks about BDSM and how BDSM can be a sexual ritual that listeners can consider partaking in. She starts talking about spanking and the whole process of it, and how one can possibly ritualize something, and she gives a really good example in that show. So if you're new to BDSM and you think that, oh no, that's not spiritual, I beg to differ. I've had several episodes where I've had different sex educators and practitioners, and BDSM practitioners coming onto the show, explaining what BDSM is about and also the sacredness behind it. And if some of you are still confused, what is BDSM? BDSM stands for bondage, domination, and the D also stands for domination and submission. So bondage, domination, submission, sadomasochism, which stands for the S and M. And so what this is really play with sensation, play with pain, play with power. And so people confuse that, BDSM is all about pain, but actually the S and M in BDSM also plays with power. So this is what BDSM is about, and actually can be fun. And we don't realize that we used to do it when we were kids. We would play police and thieves, we would play doctor, nurse, we play teacher, student, and these are the different things that we play to make sense of the world. And so we get so serious as we grow up that we forget that actually the bedroom is also a place that we can play. And BDSM is basically that. It's really not as scary as people think it is. And so sex rituals could be something that would be a really good introduction to people who would like to heighten their awareness and consciousness when it comes to sex. So do check out episode 122 on April 18. The next episode I want to summarize is Make More Love Today with myself. And this was in May 25th. And what happened was there was this campaign that I did with my colleague called Make Love Week, which ran on May 14 to 21st. So what I did was I released one video every day for that week, which we declared Make Love Week. And in that show, I summarized each episode, each video that I produced. And we are deleting that Facebook group in which those videos are parked in, but you can actually watch those videos by going to my YouTube channel, and you see that I've been releasing one YouTube educational video every day for the last 3 months actually. So the videos are actually all on my YouTube channel as well. So that episode summarized the 8 videos that I had and what you can look forward to in the campaign that we did called Make Love Week. Like I mentioned, we're deleting that Facebook group, so you won't be able to get in. But what you can do is listen to the show, and or better yet, watch the videos by going to my website, going to my YouTube channel. So in the next episode, we have Animated Sex, the Spirituality of Eros, with Dr. Jacob Pastora. And he's a German sexologist who is very accomplished. And in that episode, surprisingly, he was actually talking about Eros, the god of love, in Roman times. And so I was very intrigued in his perspective of what the Romans used to think about sexuality, and they talked about being immature and just having physical sex, and then they talked about spiritual sex and what it was like during Roman times and their belief and philosophy around sexuality during that time. So I found it really fascinating, and I was very intrigued by it. So what I did subsequently after that episode was I interviewed Dr. Jacob Pastora, and we released 3 short videos on my YouTube channel. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, or you just go to YouTube, you key in Martha and key in Jacob, Jakob, and you'll find the 3 episodes, 3 little shows that I did interviewing him on his definition of Eros, which is explained in much more detail in the show. But, maybe you would like to watch the video of us talking about sex as well. Those videos are also available on my website, my blog, which you can go to my blog and just do a search for it. You'll be able to find it. So that's episode 124 with Dr. Jacob Pastora. And the next episode is titled Integral Tantra and Shamanism. And I interviewed James Stevenson, who I met as part of a Tantra festival that I attended in India. So this happened last year in December. He was the festival organizer. And in fact, he organizes 6 international Tantra festivals in Bali, India, Holland, Portugal, California, and East Coast America. He also does dance and biodance festivals. And so I was very intrigued by biodance, and during the show he explained what biodance is about, cleared some of my misconceptions, and then also explained how someone can go and become a biodance teacher, which he has been for many years. And so basically I learned that I'm not eligible because you actually need to practice biodance for a period of time, really get it into your system. Apparently biodance clears the energies in your body, for instance, like trauma, and it's really highly sophisticated. Even the act of getting people to dance in a circle is a very ancient ritual where everybody is equal. There's no person who is the head, and there's no leader. And so he talks about biodance in the episode, and he also explains shamanism and what it means for people to go on the vision quest. And in fact, he facilitates such sessions as well. So it was really interesting to hear from him, because he is a practitioner of biodance and shamanism, and has been doing this and been teaching it for many years. And He talks about 5 levels of change, which I like to summarize here. He talks about activity, sexuality, creativity, vitality, and transcendence. So these trainings take years. First of all, being a practitioner for 2-3 years, and then later on another 3-4 years of training. He talks about sex being life force energy and the basic motivation into life, and it's more than just being in the bedroom, and it's a deeper animal drive that we have, which we can harness, so that it leads to enlightenment and consciousness. The consciousness that we have in the sexuality leads to enlightenment, and we are at different stages day to day, and being conscious about it can lead to growth. So he talks about being in the awakened state of physical awakened. He introduced the term awaken, awake, and asleep. And he says when we're asleep, we may have rapid eye movement. It's a very subtle energy. When we're awake, we are in a physical state. And he talks about the difference between that. And so if you're interested, he also talks about how he believes all of us can begin to become more spiritual, more connected to our sexuality. The first thing being meditation, and then the next thing he mentions is a vision quest. So that's with James Stevenson. So we have a break, and we're going to come back and summarize the other episodes.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
What's up? This is Brad and Mike from Lincoln Park for LifeBeat, the music industry fights AIDS. Listen up, times are tough and you get a lot of things thrown your way. If you're being pressured to have sex and you're not ready, then say no. If you're having sex, be smart and use protection. Respect yourself and protect yourself.
For more information, call the National AIDS Hotline at 1-800-342-AIDS or log on to www.lifebeat.org.
And welcome back to Arrow's Evolution. We are summarizing the past 16 episodes of the show. And let's go to episode 126, which was on June 15, Navigating Consent with Kitty Stryker. She's the author of the book, the new book, Ask, Building Consent Culture. And in the show, I asked her to discuss what consent culture is, and it seems to be very much linked to rape culture. And we talked about why it's important, and we also talked about the book and the different essays that she has in the book. And because I read the book before the show, so we were able to discuss the book. And on my website, I actually have a book review of the book called Ask. So you go to my website, you can do search, and you can search book review ask, and you'll be able to find a book review, just in case you're deciding whether you want to listen to the show or maybe you are thinking of getting the book. And it's really important because a lot of us are not really understanding consent. We might just go along with something just because somebody says it, but it's not really intentional. We kind of just do it because we are afraid of upsetting someone, or it's just easier to just, tell ourselves we're okay with doing something. And when it comes to sex, and we are not connected with our voice, some people find it difficult to speak up in the bedroom. And so practicing conscious consent outside of the bedroom and also inside of the bedroom is very beneficial. So the book actually is a compilation of many different essays from different perspectives, including sex workers and basically people who have experiences, who have something to say, who have something to add to the discussion of what is consent culture. And so Kitty is very passionate about her work. She's been doing this for a really long time. She runs a King salon in London, and she had been working on this book for many years, and it took her to realize that nobody's going to do it, and so she actually got down to working on this book, which is an epic project. So that's episode 126. The next episode, which I actually numbered wrongly, is with thriving in sex work, and this was with author Lola Dervina, and she is a previous sex worker, spent 25 years in and out around the sex industry, working as a stripper, dominatrix, porn actress, and escort over 15 years. And so she has a MA in human sexuality, and in that book she sensitively wrote about, it's actually for sex workers, on how they can take care of themselves, because sex work can be difficult and emotional labor. She talks about the different demons in sex work, which includes like shame and burnout and frustration and all these things. So the first part of the book already immediately delves into all these difficult negative emotions, and then going into strategies. So you would think that it's just for sex workers. However, if you read the book, you will realize that a lot of things that she shares are pretty practical and relevant to all of us. So if you're interested in her work, you can listen to the episode. The first half of the show, she was the only one speaking, and then later on I joined her because I was engaged. And if you are interested also to like find out more about the book, you can read my book review of the book, and you can go to my website, search for book review, Thriving in Sex Work. That's with Lola Dervina. The next episode I had was titled Warrior Woman, A Path Away from Shame Toward Power, and it's with my colleague Sarah Martin, who calls herself Warrior Woman. She's a certified sex coach and a badass. She is based in Warsaw, Poland right now. She's traveled around the world as a woman for many years, and she has studied 10 languages. She's traveled to over 35 countries, and she's a strong woman. She also previously talked about her body image issues on a previous episode. I was very intrigued by the concept of warrior woman and what she means by warrior woman, because warrior woman comes across very masculine and comes across very forceful, and she was talking about the differences in the innuendos, and what she essentially was saying is that warrior woman is somebody who takes care of herself and who has clear and strong boundaries, who can stand up for herself without being aggressive. And so it's not necessarily something, owning warrior woman is not necessarily something that is going to make us feel depleted and tired. So she cleared that misconception, and she also started going into the process of claiming warrior woman, and she made an offer in the show to listeners out there. So if you're interested, I'm not going to make her offer for her here. But yeah, listen to the show, get an idea, and then have a sense of whether you like to approach her and maybe work with her. In the next episode, it's titled Avoiding Predators in Tantra, How to Stay Safe While Expanding Consciousness. And this was with Lucy Rowett. And Lucy is based in London, and she's calls herself a eclectic soul. She's a sex positive coach, writer, and tarot card reader. So she's definitely spiritual. So she talks about her experiences going to Tantra workshops and retreats, and being targeted by predators who basically just want sex, and how this actually causes women to feel that pressurized to have sex. And it's not just saying like no to sex, it's actually being forced, like pressurized, somebody being really persistent and then shaming you for saying no by saying, oh, you're not open and things like that. So in that episode, it was interesting, like we talked about it, and then she actually went into some really practical tips of being really clear within yourself, who you are, what you want, and what you can do to get a sense of who is more likely to be a predator. This is important for people who are unsure, who are inexperienced, who don't know what to look out for. So that episode is really useful for people who go to sex festivals. We call them sex festivals, but a lot of these sex festivals are really like sex education festivals or Tantra workshops, Tantra retreats. If you go to any like sex-related kinds of trainings, not just Tantra, it's actually useful to watch out for some of these things that happen. Unfortunately, it tends to be heterosexual predators or males who are targeting women. So it's important to be aware of this. In the next episode, Living a Sex-Positive Life, I had Angelica and John C. Luna. So both of them are married, and they talked about their work as sex educators and their lifestyle, and they were very open and honest. So Angelica was sharing that her daughter was sexually abused by the father, I believe. And so now John C. Luna is a stepfather, being part of the healing process, and how she takes care of her daughter through working with different kinds of therapists, and how from there she decided that you need to stop having that shield of shame around sex, and started preparing and working towards becoming a sex educator herself. So this was a very brave episode, very vulnerable of them to share of this story, and also their lifestyle. So they have an open marriage, and I originally just thought that John was the bisexual that they were talking about, but it turns out that actually Angelica is also one. So you can see like in the episode like certain things that was coming up, and it's important to acknowledge that not all of us have that vocabulary, and how to be open-minded and yet at the same time be very mindful of our languaging, which I was trying to in the episode, you can tell. So that's an interesting episode that you may want to check out, Living a Sex-Positive Life. In the next episode, we have You've Been Lied To, Women Love Sex, Feminine Sexual Ecstasy Secrets. And this was with Jane Robinson. She is a long-time Tantra teacher, like 20 years. And she's so sweet, she's so lovely. And you can tell from the episode, she's such a lovely person. That was on July 20th. So in that episode, she clears some of the misconceptions people have around sex, around female sexuality. And she talks about her work as a Tantra teacher, and she actually did the interview as part of releasing her little book called Your Amazing Itsy Bitsy Have More Sex book. So I read the book before the show and loved it. It's so difficult to condense everything that you learn as a teacher into something that is so simple, so practical, and Jen was really capable in being able to do that. So her book would have basically some explanation around the concept that she was trying to say the 15 tips. So there were 15 different little chapters. So she would start going into explanation, and then the next part of that chapter would be the practical breakdown of the how to do it. So simple, so effective, so amazing. You're gonna love her because she's so sweet, so amazing. And so I'm gonna shout out her website. It's havemoresexbook.com. You can check that out. Listen to the show if you like to learn more about Tantra from somebody who's really sweet and amazing and good at what she does. The next episode was called The Inability to Receive, the story inside the story. And what actually happened was I had a guest scheduled, and for some reason she couldn't get patched into the show. So in that episode, the first 20 minutes was just me trying to get her on and then blabbering and not knowing what I was talking about. But then 20 minutes after, decided to change the direction of the show because our shows are always live. And so if my guest can't get on, then I just have to, wing it and say something else. So what I did was in that episode, on July 27, The Inability to Love, you can just do a quick Google search, you'll be able to find it. In that episode, I actually shared 2 personal stories involving my mom on the effects on our inability to receive. So I talked about my mom and this episode, which caused a lot of frustration, and then realizing also like how this is playing out in her marriage with my dad. And I know it's a very honest story, like talking about my mom, and but I felt that there was a point in it, so that's why I shared this story. So if you're interested in what actually I'm talking about, what are the stories, then tune in to that episode. So we have a break, and after the break, I'll come back and summarize the remaining 2 episodes.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. Om Times Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. The number 1 reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi, this is Julie Geigel.
And I'm Susan Schuler.
And I'm Lori Walker.
And we are
the Psychic Angel Channelers
from Angel Talk Tuesday.
Tune in every week at 10 a.m. Eastern on OmTimesRadio.com.
The angels have heard your call and are here to help.
Are you ready to receive?
Bathe in the beautiful vibrational frequency to help you heal, expand, and remember your magnificence with Angel Talk Tuesday.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
To get in the way before it happens.
To get a friend home safe.
And to not blame the victim.
It's on us.
To look out for each other.
To not look the other way.
It's on us to stand up.
To step in.
To take responsibility.
It's on us, all of us,
to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
And welcome back to the last 15 minutes of today's show. And in today's show, so far, I've been summarizing the past 14 episodes of Arrow's Evolution, and we have 2 more episodes left. So that's a good thing. We're making for good time. And if you want to access every single episode of Arrow's Evolution, you can go to Google and you just key in Arrow's Evolution at a glance. You'll be able to go to my website, which shows you every single episode, the link to every single episode, and you can do a Control F and look for the keywords, and you'll be able to get to that particular episode really quickly. So this is Martha of Arrow's Coaching. I'm a sexologist, sex educator, and I'm also the host of this radio show called Arrow's Evolution, as you probably know. And so let's move on to episode 133 on August 4. And in this episode, we explore the reality of porn with Dr. Jacob Pastora. So he returns after 3 months, and because I really like his work. And his thesis was actually on porn, and that was the reason why I wanted to interview him for this particular episode. And I realized that this was the first time on the show that I interviewed someone specifically on porn. And so Dr. Jacob actually answered 5 frequently asked questions which I posed to him. So he went through great lengths to prepare for the episode, and because he's German, so he had to really put in a lot of effort for the episode. He's because English is not his native language. So he answered 5 questions relating to porn. What makes porn porn? What is ethical porn? Whether porn is addictive, the harmful effects of porn, and whether porn perception is different for men and women, and also the question, this is the 6th thing actually, the question, my partner watches a lot of porn, is that cheating? So he answers these in the show, and I know he's a sexologist and he's an educator, and his perspective of porn, I have to say, is different from mine. So I didn't really want to interrupt him because, he was really putting in a lot of effort with the languaging, and so I didn't really, and also with sound and, with time lapse. So you would hear in the episode that it was a lot more about him speaking rather than myself. Sometimes because of the time delay, we end up like cutting into each other's sentences. And so in the episode, he was sharing his perspective on porn and the harmful effects, which I don't necessarily agree with. But this is not about me. This is about the show. So let's talk about what I got out of his show. Yes, so he talks about porn in the 70s and the 80s are usually being about the humiliation of women, and sex is seen as power and women seen as helpless. And in ethical porn, he explains this is where everybody is paid fair wages, everybody agrees and is consenting to the sexual act, so that when you watch the porn, you know that the people are all consenting and paid fair wages, and it feels good watching the porn, instead of feeling that this is something that people are being forced to do just because they have to do it for the money. And so the term ethical porn now exists. Also mentioned that they need to go for like STI testing in the show. So that's ethical porn, and he talks about whether porn is addictive, and he says that everything is addictive if you want to generalize. He believes that we have a resiliency towards addictive behaviors, and he talks about, for instance, sugar being addictive, and he says that porn is like fast food to feed versus being addiction, and it causes a lot of changes to our hormones, and he is actually very much against porn, basically. Whereas for me, I see porn as possibly entertainment. I see this as it can be fun. I see that porn can be a form of sex education for some people, and yet a lot of the images, makes us feel bad about ourselves. For instance, if you have a well-endowed porn artist, it make you feel inadequate. However, I feel that we do need to not blame porn for every single thing that's happening. So yeah, listen to the episode if you're interested to find out more about porn, and there was some mention about addiction, so that could be interesting to a lot of people who are very concerned about their sexual behavior. The next episode, which was last week, was on healing your child sex abuse. So healing from child sex abuse, and this was with Brooke Woon. And Brooke Woon is actually a psychologist, and she's taking a break because she's taking care of her child who has a lot of medical appointments and stuff. In that episode, she talks about how she herself went through child sex abuse, and her sharing on that show actually really broke my heart. And you can hear how I was acknowledging and affirming her. And she also talks about how she works with people and what are some of the things to look out for. She talks about child sex abuse grooming, and how you make them become small, you make them feel bad, you make them feel terrible about themselves so that you can have power and control over them. And because they are children, they really don't know better. And so the damaging long-term effects of child sex abuse, they tell, but they don't feel believed, and they were not protected. And this, of course, depends and differs from person to person. Depends whether they were believed and protected. This can actually help with the healing process. If they were shamed, this can affect them, affect their subsequent relationships. They can act out in their eating, in their sexual behavior, in their sexual issues as they grow up, in drugs and alcohol. And so there needs to be compassion in their suffering. If they learn that the world is not a safe place, then this can really affect them as adults. She talks about the different layers and flashback that survivors of child sex abuse can experience, that they can be triggered sometimes by sex itself, and they can even have addiction to sex, and they can also be so triggered that they can't even sleep with their partner on the same bed, and it can be really painful for them to as well, like painful sex. So they need to work with a therapist who they feel safe with, who will be supportive of them opening up, and also being able to support them in their healing. She talks about the link between sex and spirit being the essence of who we are, and our spirit being something that can be felt when we're very much in our bodies. And because this is the essence of who we are, the link between sex and spirit can bring us to greater levels of love. And it is not something that we can separate, the link between sex and spirit. And when we feel good, it can really affect our lives, and we can feel really positive about life. And she talks about some ways in which somebody who has gone through child sex abuse can heal themselves. Because she has a book on it, right, called I Believe, and I Believe You. And I did a book review of her book as well. You can look it up. Go to my website under search, look for book review, I Believe in You, and you can find my review of her book. But in the episode, we didn't have time to go into so much detail. I really love her book, by the way. It's sensitively written, which rightly should be. And being a survivor herself, she has a lot of experience. And not only that, like having worked with a lot of clients, because she's a psychologist, and her specialization is working with people who live through trauma, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, phobias, social difficulties, addiction, sexuality and intimacy challenges, parent-family anger issues, parenting struggles, intellectual impairment. But her passion is working with victims of child sex abuse. And it took her many years to write this book. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I really love her book. But in the episode, she talks about ways that we can heal. She talks about meditation, yoga, being in nature, dancing, exercise, body work like massage, and journaling, being all things that can support someone in being in the healing process. And you would think that, okay, yeah, we get that. And then she added that bit about how being doing meditation really helps us to stay in the here and now as opposed to being in the past. And this is something that we can actually control. And also being doing meditation and body-based activities can really allow you to be in your body as opposed to having a disassociation with your body, or what I call people who have out-of-body experiences and hate their body and hate being alive. And so meditation can also be a form of moving towards acceptance. So when she said that, I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's really powerful. So yeah, we kind of like take certain things for granted until you hear a different perspective, and then you go, oh yes, that's true. So 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys have experienced some form of child sex abuse. So this is something that is so important that we get educated in. I'll be familiar with this topic so that if we meet people who've gone through it, we know how to support these people. And I think for people who listen to this show, Eros Evolution, who are part of the Om Times Radio Network community, you realize that a lot of us do care about other people in alleviating suffering and in being a person and being a channel of love and light. So the more educated we are, the more empowered we are, the more we can help more people. So this is Martha of Eros Coaching, and do check out my website, Eros Coaching. And thanks for listening to this show. I hope it was useful, and do check out the other episodes that I've been talking about. So in the meantime, have a great week ahead. Stay tuned next week, and I'll see you. Bye.